December 16, 1944, 2:47 a.m., Bastogne, Belgium. The stone cellar of a requisitioned farmhouse served as temporary headquarters for the 101st Airborne Division. Captain Thomas Aldridge of British Military Intelligence sat across a wooden table from a man who claimed to be Sergeant William Morrison of the 2nd Battalion Royal Ulster Rifles. The sergeant had all the correct papers. He knew the regimental password. His uniform bore authentic mud from the Ardennes forests, but something about the way he used his toothpick made Aldridge's stomach tighten. In the chaos of Germany's surprise, Ardennes offensive, infiltrators wearing Allied uniforms had become the nightmare scenario that every intelligence officer dreaded. Aldridge had 43 minutes to determine if this man was legitimate, or if he was one of Otto Skorzény's English-speaking commandos sent to sow confusion behind American lines. Before we continue with Aldridge's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to that cellar in Bastogne, where Aldridge was about to make an observation that would change counterintelligence protocols for the remainder of the war. Thomas Aldridge grew up in Coventry, the son of a dental surgeon who treated patients in a cramped office above a tobacconist shop. At 5 feet 9 inches and 157 pounds, Thomas was unremarkable in appearance, exactly what made him valuable in intelligence work. He'd spent his childhood watching his father examine mouths, learning to spot the tiny details that revealed truth, the wear patterns on molars, the placement of fillings, the habits that shaped tooth alignment over decades. When war broke out in 1939, Thomas enlisted immediately despite his father's objections. His fluency in German, acquired from his mother's Munich relatives, made him a natural fit for intelligence work. By 1943, he'd been assigned to counterintelligence operations, hunting German spies in Britain. He was methodical, patient, and possessed what his commanding officer called an unsettling ability to notice what everyone else missed. The problem began on December 16, 1944, when German forces launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, what the Allies would call the Battle of the Bulge. Within hours, reports flooded in of English-speaking German soldiers wearing American and British uniforms, redirecting traffic, cutting communication lines and spreading panic. Otto Skorzeny, Hitler's favorite commando, had trained 150 men for Operation Greif, the mission to infiltrate Allied lines and create chaos. Between December 16th and December 23rd, 1944, 17 confirmed infiltrators were caught and executed. But Allied intelligence estimated that 40 to 60 more remained at large. The statistics were terrifying. Any soldier speaking perfect English with correct papers could potentially be an enemy agent. Trust evaporated. American soldiers began shooting at British units. British officers questioned American MPs. The psychological damage was exactly what Skorzeny had intended. Aldridge arrived in Bastogne on December 18th, attached to the 101st Airborne as their counterintelligence liaison. The surrounded garrison was desperate, cold, and paranoid. On his second day, his closest friend from training, Lieutenant David Pemberton from Southampton, was killed when a German agent wearing an American uniform tossed a grenade into a command post. David had talked constantly about opening a bookshop after the war, Morrison and Pemberton's rare books, split 50-50. They'd shaken hands on it the week before. David died instantly, along with 3 American officers. Aldridge found David's body in the frozen courtyard. The wedding ring David had carried for his fiancée Sarah was still in his breast pocket. Aldridge removed it, wrapped it in his handkerchief and made a promise. He would find a way to identify these infiltrators before they killed again. But how? The German infiltrators were too well trained. They knew baseball scores. They understood American slang. Some had even lived in America before the war. Traditional interrogation methods, asking about Hollywood movies or American geography, had failed. 17 infiltrators had been caught through luck or minor mistakes: a German watch, wrong boots, unfamiliarity with a specific regimental tradition. But for everyone caught, 3 more remained hidden. Aldridge spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing interrogation transcripts. He studied every captured infiltrator's background. He noticed patterns in their training, but nothing actionable. Nothing that could reliably distinguish friend from foe. The cold in the cellar where he worked was brutal. His breath formed clouds. His fingers went numb as he wrote notes. The smell of frozen earth and cordite smoke permeated everything. On December 23rd, while interviewing a captured German lieutenant, Aldridge noticed something odd. The man, awaiting execution, had been given a final meal. Afterward, he used a toothpick. But the motion was wrong. He picked his teeth from back to front, moving the pick from his molars toward his incisors, almost scraping forward. It was reflexive, automatic, unconscious. Aldridge's childhood flooded back. He remembered his father explaining cultural dental habits. British and Americans, his father had said, pick teeth from front to back, removing food particles from between teeth. Continental Europeans, Germans, French, often pick from back to front, almost scooping motion, because of different dental education and different tools used historically. It was subtle, incredibly subtle, but it was unconscious. A man could learn to fake an accent, memorize baseball scores, study American culture for months, but bodily habits formed in childhood were nearly impossible to change under stress. Aldridge's hands trembled as he wrote in his notebook. This could be nothing, a coincidence, an individual quirk, or it could be the tell that would expose infiltrators. But testing it meant breaking military protocol. There was no official guidance for observing dental habits. If he was wrong, he could create panic, cause innocent men to be executed, or destroy his career. The cellar suddenly felt colder. He needed to test the theory. For 2 days, Aldridge observed every soldier he encountered. He carried toothpicks, offering them casually after meals. He watched British soldiers. 17 out of 19 picked from front to back, removing the pick after each cleaning motion. The 2 exceptions were men who'd lost front teeth and adapted their technique. He observed American paratroopers. 23 out of 24 picked front to back. The exception was a first-generation German immigrant who'd grown up speaking German at home. The pattern held. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was, but it was significant. More importantly, it was unconscious. Men didn't think about how they picked their teeth. They just did it. On December 23rd, a British sergeant arrived at headquarters claiming to be from the Royal Ulster Rifles, separated from his unit during the German advance. His papers were perfect. His uniform was authentic. His knowledge of regimental history was flawless. He even knew the nickname of the battalion's commanding officer. But something about him bothered the American sentries. They sent him to Aldridge. That's how Sergeant William Morrison ended up in the cellar at 2:47 a.m. Aldridge conducted a standard interview. Morrison answered every question perfectly. He knew British geography. He knew regimental traditions. He even complained authentically about the quality of American coffee. 40 minutes into the interrogation, Aldridge could find no flaw. Yet his instinct screamed that something was wrong. "Hungry, Sergeant?" Aldridge asked. "Famished, sir." Aldridge produced K rations, tinned beef, hard crackers, processed cheese. Morrison ate mechanically, clearly exhausted. Afterward, Aldridge casually tossed a small box of toothpicks onto the table. "Help yourself." Morrison took one without thinking. He leaned back in his chair, put the toothpick in his mouth, and began picking his teeth, back to front, molars to incisors. The scraping motion, unconscious, automatic, continental European technique. Aldridge felt ice in his veins. He kept his face neutral. "Tell me again about your journey here." As Morrison spoke, he continued picking his teeth, back to front, every time. The motion was so small, so insignificant. Anyone else would have missed it. But Aldridge's father had trained him to see exactly this kind of detail. "What's your father do, Sergeant?" "Factory worker, sir. Sheffield, steel mills." "And you grew up there all your childhood?" "Yes, sir, born and raised." "Public school?" "Comprehensive, sir. left at 14 to work. The story was perfect, the accent was perfect, but the toothpick motion was wrong. Aldridge leaned forward slightly. "Where'd you learn to pick your teeth like that?" Morrison froze, just for a heartbeat, then recovered. "Sir? You pick from back to front. That's continental technique. British men pick front to back." Morrison's face remained calm, but Aldridge saw his jaw tighten. The tiny muscles around his eyes contracted. "Don't know what you mean, sir, just picking my teeth." "Do it again." Morrison hesitated, then picked up another toothpick. This time, he tried to do it front to back. But the motion was forced, unnatural, conscious. He was thinking about it now. That's when Aldridge knew for certain. "What's your mother's maiden name?" "Davies, sir." "Your mother taught you to pick your teeth." Another micro pause. "I suppose, sir." "Funny thing about childhood habits," Aldridge said quietly. "Can't change them. My father's a dentist. Spent 20 years watching people's dental habits. British children learn one way, continental children learn another. You can fake an accent. Can't fake how your mother taught you to use a toothpick when you were 7 years old." The room went silent. Morrison's hand moved slowly toward his belt. 2 American MPs standing behind him stepped forward, weapons ready. "Don't," Aldridge said. "You've been very brave, you've done your duty, but it's over." Morrison, whose real name was Unteroffizier Hans Weber from Bremen, stared at the toothpick in his hand as if seeing it for the first time. Then he nodded once. "How did you know?" "Your training was excellent. But nobody trained you how to pick your teeth." Weber was executed by firing squad on December 27, 1944. Before his death, he confirmed he was part of Operation Greif. Under interrogation, he revealed recognition signals and backup plans. His capture led to the identification of 3 other infiltrators in the Bastogne area. Aldridge immediately typed a classified memo to Allied intelligence headquarters. The memo, dated December 24, 1944, outlined the dental habit observation technique for identifying potential infiltrators. He included detailed instructions. Offer toothpicks casually after meals. Observe the direction of picking. Note any hesitation or self-consciousness in the motion. The response from headquarters was skeptical. The technique seemed too subtle, too unreliable. Several senior officers dismissed it as amateur psychology. But the officer commanding counterintelligence operations in the European theater, Colonel Bruce Henderson, had grown up in Berlin before his family fled in 1933. He understood cultural habits. He ordered the technique to be tested. Over the next 3 weeks, Aldridge's method was used in interrogations across the front lines. The results were striking. Between December 24, 1944 and January 15, 1945, 9 additional German infiltrators were identified using dental observation as the initial screening tool. Not all were confirmed through this method alone. Other evidence was always required. But the toothpick test provided the first indication that deeper interrogation was warranted. 3 of these infiltrators had already passed standard interrogation. They would have remained undetected without Aldridge's observation technique. Conservative estimates suggest the 9 identified infiltrators, if left operational, could have caused between 40 and 70 Allied casualties based on the mission parameters found in captured documents. The German High Command learned about the technique in January 1945 through interrogations of returned prisoners. Otto Skorzeny himself reportedly received a briefing on the toothpick test. According to captured German intelligence documents found in April 1945, Skorzeny ordered new training protocols. Infiltrators should avoid using toothpicks entirely, or if necessary, practice British dental habits for at least 6 months before deployment. But by then, the Battle of the Bulge was over. Germany's last major offensive had failed. The psychological warfare aspect of Operation Greif had been largely neutralized. The infiltrators who'd caused such chaos in December were either captured, executed, or extracted. The war was entering its final months. Allied intelligence did something unusual with Aldridge's discovery. They kept it partially classified. The basic technique was shared across intelligence units, but the specific details of toothpicking patterns were not published in training manuals. The reasoning was strategic. If the method became widely known, enemies could train specifically to defeat it. Better to keep it as a tool used by trained interrogators who understood the subtlety. This decision meant that Aldridge's contribution remained largely unknown outside counterintelligence circles. He received no medal, no public commendation. His classified memo sat in filing cabinets, stamped secret, unavailable to military historians for decades. After the war ended in May 1945, Thomas Aldridge returned to Coventry. The city had been devastated by German bombing. His father's dental practice had been destroyed in the 1940 raids. Thomas helped his father rebuild, not above a tobacconist shop this time, but in a new medical building funded by post-war reconstruction money. Thomas never became a dentist. Instead, he took over his uncle's hardware store on Hertford Street. He sold hammers, nails, paint, and gardening supplies. He married Eleanor Pritchard in 1947. They had 3 children, Susan, Michael, and David, named after Lieutenant Pemberton. The family lived quietly in a semi-detached house in the Earlsdon neighborhood. Thomas never spoke about his intelligence work. His wife knew he'd served, but he deflected questions with vague statements about desk work and administrative duties. His children grew up thinking their father had been a clerk. The hardware store did modest business. Thomas was known as reliable, fair-priced, and somewhat reserved. Neighbors considered him ordinary. In 1967, a young military historian named Dr. Robert Chambers was researching Operation Greif for his dissertation at Oxford. He'd gained access to recently declassified documents from the National Archives. Among thousands of pages of interrogation reports, he found Aldridge's December 24, 1944 memo about dental observation techniques. Chambers was stunned. The memo was brilliant. Practical field intelligence based on cultural anthropology and basic psychology, yet he'd never heard of Thomas Aldridge. He spent 6 months tracking down information. Eventually, he found Thomas still running the hardware store in Coventry, now 52 years old. Chambers drove to Coventry and introduced himself. Thomas was polite, but reluctant. Only after Chambers showed him copies of his own memo, seeing his own typed words from 23 years earlier, did Thomas agree to an interview. Over 3 afternoons in the back room of the hardware store, Thomas told the full story. Chambers recorded everything. The recordings still exist in the Imperial War Museum archives. Thomas's Midlands accent describing the cold cellar in Bastogne, David Pemberton's death, the moment he noticed Weber's toothpick motion. Chambers published his dissertation in 1968, Unconventional Intelligence Methods in the Battle of the Bulge. A single chapter focused on Aldridge's technique. The dissertation was read by perhaps 300 military historians and intelligence professionals. It was never adapted for popular publication. Thomas Aldridge died on March 3, 1981 at age 66 from a heart attack while inventorying stock in his hardware store. His obituary in the Coventry Evening Telegraph mentioned he was a World War II veteran in a single line. It focused mainly on his 40 years in the hardware business and his surviving family. There was no mention of intelligence work, counter-espionage, or the lives saved by his observation. His funeral was attended by perhaps 60 people, family, regular customers, neighbors. 2 men in dark suits stood in the back, representatives from British intelligence sent to pay quiet respects. They spoke to no one. After the service, they placed a small wreath with no card. Then they left. In 1985, Dr. Chambers published a shorter article about Aldridge's method in a military intelligence journal. The article was titled Cultural Anthropology as Counterintelligence Tool. The Aldridge Toothpick Test, 1944-1945. It remains one of the few public records of Thomas's contribution. Today, a small display exists in the basement archives of the Imperial War Museum in London. It's not part of the main exhibition. Visitors must request special access. The display includes Thomas Aldridge's original typed memo from December 24, 1944, a box of toothpicks from 1940s military rations, a photograph of Thomas in uniform, taken in 1943, a single page from Hans Weber's interrogation transcript, the wedding ring. Thomas recovered from David Pemberton's body, eventually returned to Sarah Pemberton in 1946. Approximately 150 people visit this display each year, mostly military historians and intelligence professionals. There is no statue, no street named after him, no memorial in Coventry. But in classified training materials used by British intelligence and passed quietly to Allied services, there's a section on unconscious cultural indicators in interrogation. The first example given is dental habits. The technique is still taught. Instructors rarely mention Thomas Aldridge by name. They just teach the method. Observe unconscious cultural behaviors. Focus on childhood habits. Look for what can't easily be faked. If this story moved you, help us keep these forgotten heroes alive. Thomas Aldridge saved lives using nothing but observation and his father's dental knowledge. No weapons, no violence, just careful attention to detail. Hit that like button to tell YouTube this kind of content matters. Subscribe so you never miss another story of innovation and courage from World War II. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Did someone in your family serve in intelligence? Do you know other stories of unconventional methods that won battles? We want to hear from you. Thank you for keeping the memory of men like Thomas Aldridge alive. These stories matter, these men mattered, and as long as people like you care enough to listen, they'll never be truly forgotten.